Chapter 19. A Crystal Road. Imagine, for a moment, that you are Graelyn Scythes. You are a girl. No, you're a woman. No, you can't make up your mind which label suits you better. Your skin should be more sun-baked than it is, but it's not. You've been trying to figure that out in the back of your head this whole time. There must be something different about light or the way it interacts with things in the world you were just in, but that's been pushed out of your brain by what's in front of you. There's a figure at a desk, in strange robes, writing. The desk is broad and dark, formed of a deep and sullen wood. The figure rises slightly at your presence. Your foot touches down, and there's a note. You recognize the note. It's an A on the treble clef, the one you get to first from the bottom of the staff. The slab of faintly glowing crystal filled with sand beneath your foot made that note like a piano key. You learned piano as a child. You want nothing more than to be an adult. You want nothing more than to be a child. You played that note with Lizette. Her tiny fingers are learning the notes you did so long ago. You worry you poisoned her. But this whole road you're on is crystal, and you will be walking it. Behind you steps Arch, your friend. You barely knew him before this journey, and now he's just always there. Strange. You look up. Your jaw drops. You feel the cool air in your mouth, giving a taste to go with the awe you feel inside you. Good God, look at the stars! They aren't even stars, though. You try to take in the magnitude of it all. You try. You've seen this before, but it was different then. You were with an army, with Kinnan. Your mind was elsewhere. Now you can see it, really see it. It's glorious. Your thin fingers want to reach out for each star, each world, each dimension. The stars spin around you. Your crystal road lights a path to the world of the gods and mythology. Bifrost is right. It is apt. You see it now. You're behind the curtain, behind the world. It clicks. The majesty descends on you and you feel small. But not in the way you usually do. "Shit," says the man behind the desk. The magic is suddenly and utterly broken for you. You stop being you. You're just the reader again. Sorry. You return in front of the words where you are, where you were. But you were Graelyn for a moment. I hope you briefly enjoyed the guided tour. "Hello?" Graelyn says, as you externally observe her again. "How did you get back here?" the figure at the desk says, rising to its full height. "I stepped through the looking glass," Graelyn says, and the present tense starts to fade. You were part of it, but less and less now. You're just reading a book again, which is in itself a pretty good thing. "I'm warning you," he says. "You need to leave immediately, all of you. It knows we're here. Shh! Stay quiet." All of you is odd to say for two visitors. The figure is silent for a moment. It leans down and scrawls something down. "By order of the firmament, I'm ending this." "We're trying to get home," Arch cuts in. "I don't know who the firmament is." Pathetic. But the fact that you got here is astonishing. "Are you of sound mind?" it asks. They look at each other and shrug. "The stars are plenty." "I assume so?" Puzzling. Regardless, your adventure has gone on long enough. It sits back down. It scrawls. Its ink is the color of blue when you dream. Graelyn walks down the path, the notes echoing in eternities. Arch clumps behind her. It finishes defining the firmament above our sky on paper. Graelyn opens her mouth to speak. Graelyn opened her mouth to speak. The universes go black, and the crystal road carries you no more. your eyes scarred only by a blue scrawl that floats off into the blackness of a void. Perhaps it could be something like a dream, but you felt your foot make an A on the treble clef. The sheets were warm, and she didn't want to leave them, but the voice at the edge of her consciousness kept calling. Then the cat walked over her. "Graelyn, breakfast is ready." "Coming, Mom," she said, suddenly jerking to attention. Mr. Sprinkles took that time to sit down on her head. She carefully lifted him off and set him down as he meowed at her. "Shh! I've got to get dressed before Mom gets impatient." She hurriedly got herself ready, removing her PJs and slipping on her underclothes and skirt, buttoning her shirt so fast she missed one at first, loosely putting her tie around her neck and searching for her cat pin. Where was it? It was nowhere on her vanity, and she lightly cursed as she gave up and grabbed another pin, which she didn't remember having, of a giraffe. Sure, why not? Graelyn hurried out of her room, slipping her shoes on and grabbing her bag in case she needed to make a quick exit. As she made her way down the stairs, she nearly knocked over Triana, who was carrying a cup of tea. "Graelyn, what's the rush?" She looked down at her. "You know, you were not leaving for the zoo for a few hours yet, right?" Graelyn was speechless. She just stared at her. "You all right, little sis?" She nodded dumbly. "Okay, great. Well, Dad made waffles again, so try to pretend like you're excited." "Dad? Made waffles?" She held onto the railing as she made her way down to the dining room, where her mother, older sister Zandra, and older brother Alexei were seated, with her dad rushing back and forth from the kitchen, dropping different items like glasses of milk, cups of tea, and waffles on the table. They were all smiling. Well, except Alexei, who was busy looking at something on his tablet. Zandra waved at her as she stared, looking at her quizzically. "Good morning." "Morning," she managed to respond. "Is something wrong? You look pale. What was this?" It occurred to her that this was wrong. Her father had moved to Annapolis, Maryland, after he divorced her mother, along with Alexei and Triana. Zandra had run away from home. Graelyn and her mother had lived alone after that. Then she'd gone to Atlantis. Then she'd ended up in Songbird's world. And had that all been a dream? Some kind of nightmare? She set her bag down and sat at the table, still dumbfounded. "Graelyn," she snapped back to reality, or whatever this was. I'm fine, just had a bad dream." Her mother reached out to put a hand on her shoulder, and Graelyn flinched, pulling her body in tight to avoid the blow. No blow came. "Graelyn, are you sure you're okay? We can put off the trip to the zoo, you know. You're more important to us than a little trip," her dad said. Graelyn was about to respond when another voice came in. "Dad, I don't want to miss the zoo today," her little brother Peter said. Graelyn heard the voice and turned. And he was there. His light red hair was shiny in the early light. He had a big blotch of freckles right over his nose and cheeks that didn't travel over the rest of his face. He was rubbing his left eye and yawning. He was perfect, and Graelyn knocked over her chair as she scampered over to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. Peter, you're here. You're really here. I can't believe it." She held back the tears she wanted to cry, not wanting to look weak in front of her mother, but still hugged him tighter. Oh, Peter. I can't believe this. You're really here, she repeated. Yes, he rasped through her hug. She kissed him on the cheek and let him go, keeping him at arm's length as he stared at her in confusion. She stared at him in wonder and ruffled his soft red hair. "Hey," she said lovingly. okay? He repeated. Overwhelmed with emotion, she took him in her arms again. Graelyn, are you sure you're okay? You're also blocking my way down the stairs, Triana noted. Sorry, Graelyn said, getting up and trying to look non-concerted. Sorry, it was just a really weird, bad dream. Jesus, how bad could it be? Sandra said. Language, Sandra, her mother said. Graelyn expected her to hear an undertone of malice there, but instead Sandra just rolled her eyes. We're all adults here, Mom. Sandra hadn't dyed her hair. It was still red, like her mother's. Graelyn and Peter aren't. Sandra waved her off, and Graelyn awkwardly took the seat back at the table, letting her father put a waffle on her plate. He finally sat down, and her mother held out a hand to her. Not entirely sure what to do, Graelyn gave her a low 5. Then, as her mother became quizzical, she noticed everyone else was joining hands. Oh. Blushing, she took her mother's hand and tried to hold back the shivers running through her body as she did so. On her left, though, Peter took her hand and she felt euphoric. The two feelings clashed inside her. Let us pray, her dad said. Pray? Graelyn tried to remember the last time she had prayed. Then she remembered the last time she had prayed, and it took all her focus to not bolt up from the table. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, the table began in unison. Graelyn couldn't make herself form the word. She tried. She really tried, but she couldn't make them come. She waited it out till her mother and Peter squeezed her hands and let go, and the table said an amen. Dig in. I don't want to buy any of you expensive zoo food, her dad joked. It wasn't actually funny, but Graelyn found herself joining in the chuckle. Morning, Archimedes. I hope you slept well, the computer said. Thanks, Wendy, Arch replied, groggy, for only a moment before the mechanical parts of his body pumped the organic parts of him full of chemicals he needed to wake up. Fully conscious, he got off of the form-fitted slab that was his bed and began to go about his day on the station. Outside his door, his sister Artemis was sucking up a packet of nutrient paste, while his mom was busy getting ready to go tend to the hydroponic gardens. Good morning, Archimedes, his father, Apollo, said, his carapace lighting up with friendly symbols in his general direction. Hey, Arch, said Artemis, throwing up a caricature of Arch bumbling about a room on hers. Artemis, really? Aphrodite, his mother cut in. Sorry, Mom. Get a packet of paste from the dispenser. Today is going to be a visiting day, so we all need to be on our best strength. You might want to polish your carapace. They all, of course, had identical carapaces. That was one of the whole points of their society. After Earth died in the nuclear apocalypse due to divisions in humanity, removing barriers between people like specific cultures was the next logical step to prevent it happening again, and Visiting Day was important. It was when the ambassador from the survivors of Earth came to visit with new supplies he'd scavenged. It was always a good day when Manuel Salazar was around. Manuel Salazar. Thinking the name stopped him cold. He looked down at his mechanical hand and flexed the fingers in and out. He looked at his sister, sitting there sipping her paste. He saw her lifeless body floating out in space along with his mother and father's. He saw the hull rupturing those two women who had come on board and ruined his life that day. But he had been so young and naive those months ago. He saw Manuel Salazar in his mind's eye, and he knew who was at the heart of all this. His sister, outside of his eye, angled the paste packet, trying to get the last morsel out. I've never been so excited, Archimedes said. He wasn't even lying. Both of his parents' carapaces lit up in fireworks. It is an exciting day, Arch. He's been gone a long time this time. I wonder what he brought back this time. Arch didn't know. He didn't care, as long as Manuel Salazar was aboard that ship. Arch filled up a packet of paste from the dispenser and drank it down. He then got into the hygienics machine and allowed it to clean and repair his carapace to the best of its ability. He stayed focused. Then it occurred to him, obviously, while he was in the cyborg equivalent of a shower of all things, that this didn't make a lick of sense. The machine removed his plating, unscrewing it, and cleaning his skin down to the pores, and cleaning, replacing, fixing, polishing, and oiling his mechanical parts. The machine got to work fixing some internal damage left over from where chrome teeth had reached inside him and gripped. That was the hole here, wasn't it? He'd seen his family die. He'd met Manuel before. He'd been to other realities, and this was not his own reality. This couldn't be a dream. He checked his internal status, and that clearly told him if he was dreaming or awake, which was probably annoying for people trying to write stories about trying to tell if you were sleeping or dreaming, but which was very convenient for him. His memory was video, and he could see it all. He could literally pull up the files of the past. He saw his family die. He saw Ares push him into the ocean from that VTOL. He saw Graelyn's face as she woke him up, saw her look of shock as he grabbed onto a rocket and flew out the side of a building, saw Alice's face as they had talked, saw himself as an owl of all things. No. There was something that wasn't right here, and it wasn't his memory. Graelyn watched the giraffe eat some leaves off a tree, its jaw working back and forth to grind the greenery up before swallowing it. Peter was watching it enthusiastically, and she smiled down at him. He wouldn't be shorter than her for long, she realized. How odd that was. He had in so many ways stayed the same height for so long to her. Hey, you creep! Stop looking at my sister! Peter was no longer looking at the animals, but looking at a man standing nearby, his eyes fixed on Graelyn, a camera lens lowering. Graelyn turned to look at him, and felt her own hands on this railing. But not her hands. She saw he had a black bag, so professional camera equipment. No one bothered carrying that stuff around unless they were very serious anymore. She met his gaze, and he turned and fled. What was that all about? Peter said. Graelyn realized, and ran after him. Graelyn, wait! But she was already gone. The man wasn't particularly skilled at getting away or hiding, so she quickly caught him, grabbing him by the upper arm as he tried to run. Realizing he was caught, he stopped. The chase had been brief, and Graelyn realized how much more athletic she felt after all her adventures. She had, in all honesty, never exercised in her life of her own choice. She did well in the gym at school, but only because she wanted an A+. Now she could run down a grown man. Maybe it was just because he wasn't athletic, but she'd been away from home for some time now. Sure, most of that time had actually been spent in jail, but she wasn't going to count that against herself. Why are you taking pictures of me? She didn't let go of his arm. Where was this coming from inside her? Look, I don't want any trouble. You're the one taking pictures of a teenage girl and running away. She felt strange, wrong. Why wasn't she running? I'm Igor Andropov. I'm a photographer for Centro Media Moscow. And I thought you looked like someone I took pictures of yesterday. Graelyn tightened her hand. She felt stronger than she should. She scowled. Well, you're clearly mistaken. I should just go. Show me the pictures. You don't want to see them. Why? They're of a girl who died on the metro last night. A maglev train derailed. 17 people died. Among them was a girl. The body was nowhere to be found an hour later. Graelyn's grip loosened. Her scowl faded. It sunk in. Was her name Graelyn Scythes? They are literally replaceable, as in, we've replaced people before, Jonathan had said. Yes, he replied. Graelyn let go, and tried to keep her footing on the pavement. A smiling concrete elephant for children to climb on made eyes at her. She stumbled. She was dead. That hadn't been a nightmare. She was her own stand-in. She felt her hands on the railing by the giraffe and saw herself looking down at a younger Peter. "We'll come back here again when you're feeling better." "Promise?" "Promise." She saw him weakly smile from his wheelchair. The photographer was saying something, but she couldn't hear him. She could feel herself, this self. She was cold. She felt herself lurch over and the pancakes come up her throat. Falling to her knees, she retched on the ground. She felt a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She spat out the vomit from her mouth and wiped her mouth on her sleeve. "I want to see the pictures," she said weakly. "I don't think that—" "Show me the damn pictures!" she yelled, grabbing his wrist. He slowly nodded and she let go, breathing hard. He pulled out a tablet, opened something up on it, and handed it to her. "It's pretty gruesome." She didn't care. She looked at the first picture. It was a young woman, 17, a piece of rebar going through her neck and up through the base of her skull. Her glasses were askew, as if she was just about to fix them, but somehow hadn't fallen off her head. One of her legs had been crushed by falling debris. Blood had soaked through her white shirt from an unseen injury in her abdomen. She had been sitting on the train. She could feel herself there, right now, the rumbling beneath her, the passing cityscape through the window. Then there was a snapping sound, and she dropped what she was holding, a tablet, to the floor of the train. So, it suddenly became a 45-degree slope. She felt herself fly through the air, and, you can guess the rest. Graelyn held her neck and handed the tablet back to the man. "Was she your sister?" he whispered. "Graelyn, where are you?" Peter yelled. She looked the man in the eyes, and finally, she felt like herself, and the instinct she'd been longing for took over. She ran. The whole of Anarabe Station had come out for Manuel's visit. After all, they always did. There were very few who were manning essential systems, of course, but there were no volunteers for those jobs today. They stood together in the greeting room and waited for the shuttle to dock, watching it on the view screen together. For the first time in a long time, Arch felt at home. Here were the people he'd grown up with, people who kept their skin covered, who removed their excess body parts. He felt no embarrassment here with them, no awkwardness at looking at someone else's skin. The temple to the Olympian gods was still here. He'd checked on the way over. Oracle Hermia and Princess Nike had been busy arguing over what sort of offering to make for Manuel's arrival, as usual. Their bickering had annoyed him so much as a child, but now he stood outside the temple door and listened to their petty argument. The evidence was overwhelming that this was not his home. He knew this had to be an alternate reality he'd been placed into, probably by that figure at the desk, somehow. No one could tell him it was a dream, because his records were too precise. No one would fool him. He'd already been fooled his whole life. But still, this felt like home. When Arch had been a child, he had been there for the first visit of Manuel Salazar to their station. He'd shown up out of the blue, broadcasting on an emergency communications channel for help. Oh, how surprised they'd been. They'd gone their whole lives thinking they were all that was left of humanity, and then he'd shown up in his ratty spacesuit, tears streaming from his eyes, saying he'd been searching for any other survivors. They all knew the story of the war, how humanity had failed, had turned the Earth into a nuclear wasteland, how they had been the only ones who saw it coming and had fled to Anarabe Station. The Earth and its colonies had all been nuked, and the signals had died off. Manuel came as the ambassador of the last survivors of that great planet, who had survived the blast in a giant bunker. There were very few of them, But he promised to bring them things they needed and come and visit. He brought holograms from the other survivors, sickly-looking people who waved cheerfully at the camera, and the people of Anarabe knew they were the chosen ones. Earth was unsafe to traverse, and they needed to stay on board. And so they did. They waited. But in hindsight, there were so many incongruities. They couldn't have all the spare parts to keep building replacement parts for every new person born aboard the station, and according to the elders, the station had been built hundreds of years ago, but the quality of the parts kept improving, and the station seemed fairly new itself, not state-of-the-art, but clearly from within half a century. He had spent time before Manuel's arrival today rooting through the things he wasn't allowed to. He opened panels and pulled open circuit boxes to find parts labeled Centro Systems, manufactured 2449. He checked the communications receiving devices and found there was a block in his mind telling him to not do that. Just ignore it, Arch. So he ignored it, deleted that code, and went back. After looking through the device's code, he found it was programmed to only accept and receive encrypted transmissions from vessels with the proper transponder codes. He knew very well what that meant. His body tried to regulate his rage and pump in chemicals while associating those chemicals with good memories of Manuel Salazar. He stopped thinking about anger and calmed himself, then went to his own code and deleted that too. His mind wasn't even his own. His body plotted against him at every turn. When he tried to question it, a voice in his head told him not to. The white walls of the station were crushing in on him. His body was a husking shell. He hated it. He hated his stupid body filling him with poison. He was weak, trapped in it. Arch reached for his arm and began tugging on it. Get it off! He wanted it gone. He didn't want to have it anymore. Get a hold of yourself. That isn't doing anyone any good. He exhaled. His breath was reprocessed. He knew what he had to do. He went back into his own code and sifted through it. He had work to do before the ship docked. And that is how he ended up that day in the greeting room. They had a room just for greeting visitors, when they were the last of humanity, and no one was biologically allowed to think that was odd. Arch allowed his body to move into the pre-programmed greeting posture as the shuttle docked, and a handsome man from Guatemala stepped through the airlock, grinning as he grabbed a modesty mask from the wall. "My friends," he said, throwing his arms wide, "it is good to be back here on Anarabe Station." Applause. He took a short bow. "I come with more gifts and news from Earth. It looks like we are ready to take a few more of you back for the terraforming project." Ah, yes, the terraforming project. Every so often, Manuel would take a select group of people from the station back in his spacecraft. It was usually only one or two. The stated goal was that they would be helping to create a radiation-free area on Earth that they could all move into eventually. They always felt very happy for whoever was chosen, and they were never seen again. But no one ever missed them. Applause followed. "This time I will be taking..." He reached into a pocket and pulled out a tablet. "Tethys and Oberon." There was applause, and the two lucky people got many pats on the back, the clunky sound of the pats echoing throughout the chamber. "Mr. Salazar," Arch spoke. He raised an eyebrow and lowered the tablet. No one ever spoke over him. "I think you should take me as well." Several people's carapaces lit up in awkward swirls, as if to say, "He is not with me." "Arch, what are you doing?" his sister said through text that appeared at the bottom of his vision. "Trust me," he replied. "Oh," Manuel laughed. "You know, I follow strict guidelines, and it seems like you might need to be serviced." Mandatory laughter. "Ariadne Moore," Arch said. "Centro Systems. Nojpatin Inc. Graelyn, Scythes, John Errol, Project Atlantis, Maria Salazar. He paused, trying to think of one more thing to say. Lizette. Manuel's jaw dropped. Possum Sinestro Victor Baterfish, Manuel said, and the room stopped being at attention. Instead, they drooped as if they had been turned off. Arch stood tall. The auditory deactivation code doesn't work on you anymore. Impressive. Neither will the non-auditory ones, Arch said. Manuel rubbed his chin. Well, this is very interesting. I never expected this. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Revenge, Arch said, and burst forward, faster than Manuel could have realized. In the time it took the edges of Manuel's eyes to widen, Arch had cleared the room, unsheathed the sword from his arm, and put it to Manuel's throat. Manuel looked down at it, terrified. Wait, he rasped. Why? If you kill me, this station will explode. There's a subdermal implant in case there was some sort of revolution inside me. You kill me, boom, everyone here goes up in smoke. Well, not literal smoke, we're in space. Naturally, Arch said, unamused. He scanned for devices that were accepting signals on Manuel's body and got back a ping. It wouldn't identify itself. It could be something else, but Arch couldn't take that chance, not with these people's lives. Still, he had the upper hand. I have a lot of questions for you, Manuel. We're going back to Earth. But it's a wasteland. Yes, I'm sure it's horrific, drinking beers on the roof of your private pyramid with your loving extended family. Manuel looked afraid. Good. Well, we're all friends here. Are we? How about you take that knife from my throat, and we can have a nice civil chat. Just you and me, eh? Arch nodded and lowered the blade. Manuel rubbed his throat. Jesus, kid. I have to say, I really am impressed. You lied to us. You lied to us for our whole lives. He laughed. Of course I did. There was no other way to keep the project going. You can't just make your own private army of super soldiers by telling everyone that's what you're doing. You get everyone too riled up. They start fighting before you're ready for them to, and then what good is everything? Arch looked over at the silent room of his countryfolk. Their eyes blinked in unison like a big device indicating it was on low power mode. Soldiers. We were going to be soldiers? Manuel rolled his eyes and started walking away. Arch raised his sword again. Oh, don't get grumpy. I'm just going to show you something. Arch followed silently, and they went to the station's theater. There was a big projector that could make either 2D or 3D images and rows of seating. Well, the station's population is asleep sometimes out with films in here. After all, nobody leaves me alone on the surface for 10 seconds. Business, not that you know that. Or perhaps you do. I'm so curious how you do now. You can learn a lot when you stop being a slave. Slave? You're being very melodramatic. Arch's carapace went red. Manuel seemed to be picking out something to show him. Am I? You controlled my thoughts. You kept me from thinking. You told us a story and made our whole lives a lie. We were your slaves to do with as you wanted. Don't sugarcoat it. Manuel pulled up a video. I'm your parent. Parents tell all sorts of lies. You have to tell them to your children from time to time. You're not my father, Arch yelled. My father's name is Apollo. My mother's name is Aphrodite. We were happy here, and you ruined everything. My dear, what was your name again? Archimedes, Arch spat. Archimedes? Right, you really know so very little. The video began playing, and Manuel had been right about at least that last thing. Graelyn had spent the rest of the day at the zoo with her family and had come home with them for dinner. They'd laughed together, and everything had been going great until Graelyn dropped a glass of cider. She'd been laughing at something Triana had said, and something about bears' eating habits or something. She quickly forgot what it was when the glass slipped out of her hand. It smashed on the floor, the dark liquid splashing everywhere, and Graelyn panicked. She ran for the towels and began to wipe it up. Damn, Graelyn said. It's just a glass, Graelyn. We'll print a new one. Graelyn looked up at her like she was crazy. But Mom, she said, and as if on cue, she came around the corner. I had a crash. Is everyone all right? Graelyn covered her face and waited for the yelling to start. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt an arm gently stroke her back. It's okay, sweetheart. It's just a glass. It was her mother's voice. She peeked out and saw her face, smiling like she cared. It was a trick. She wanted something from her. I'll clean it up. You don't have to worry, Graelyn said, and got right back to work, picking up the shards of glass with her hands. Graelyn, the cleaning droid will get those. No, it's no trouble. Sweetheart, you'll cut yourself. It's no problem. I'll be okay. Her mom looked really worried. Graelyn, is there something wrong? You've been acting weird all day. She stopped picking up the shards and tried to meet her mom's gaze, but couldn't. She couldn't really actually be concerned, could she? It struck Graelyn, then, that she didn't know the difference between love and manipulation. They went together. You played games with people. You tried to get things out of them. You tried to hurt them without implicating yourself. You lied to them to make them think they were guilty of things they hadn't done. That was love. That had been love ever since. Is there something going on at school you haven't told us? Is someone hurting you? She had to be lying. No one actually cared. Arch stayed with her because he needed her to get home. Kinnan needed her for her plan. Manuel thought he could use her for a strategic advantage. Alice felt she owed her for stopping her for killing Manuel. They all had a game they were playing. Not Lisette, a voice said. And she played along. She just wanted to be alone, where no one would love or hurt her. Same thing, really. Where no one would... Her mother hugged her. Graelyn shuddered. But her mother didn't say anything. She just held her and rocked her gently. And there was a horrifying realization in the back of Graelyn's head, one she tried very hard to not admit. But the possibility of it was just too horrific. She couldn't avoid looking at it. Maybe there were people who were not just using you for things, but actually cared about you? That was impossible. She tried to fathom it and failed. The droid came by and cleaned up the mess, and Graelyn waited for her mother to use her failure in dropping her glass against her. But it never came. She went to bed in her room, and her mother called out good night to her. She replied and then curled up under her sheets, grabbing her cat and holding him close. You are the only one who was there for me, Mr. Sprinkles. Even though you're not, my Mr. Sprinkles, you're a Mr. Sprinkles, at least. So let me pose a question for you. Hypothetically, do you think there is a universe out there where my family loves me? The cat was a cat and did not respond. Yeah, I think it's unlikely too, she said, gently stroking it. But if that's a possibility, do you think I can live a lie, replacing someone else who died, living her life for her? The cat vainly struggled to go somewhere else, and then accepted the petting. She didn't need the cat to give its advice for her to know the answer to that question. It was plain as day. She didn't need to think about it. She was 100% fine with living a lie. When she woke up in the morning trembling, she went up and kissed her mother on the cheek. Her mother smiled back. Are you feeling better today, Graelyn? I am, Mom. She wasn't sure if she believed this could be true, but it didn't even matter. She wanted to believe.